Hey guys, welcome to the video on Chapter 8, Lesson 3. I have two goals for you guys in this lesson. First off, I want you guys to understand how sugar is used to generate energy in the form of ATP. And secondly, I want you guys to be able to describe how sugar is turned into energy in the form of ATP. So, starting off guys, cell respiration. You might have some idea what this is. We talked about it a little bit in the first lesson, but I didn't go into over too much detail. Basically, cell respiration is the turning of sugar and fats into energy for the body. Energy in this case is in the form of ATP. Now remember, ATP is your body's energy source. Remember, ATP basically is your body's way of making energy. Now, it follows the following chemical formula. It takes one molecule of glucose. This C6H12O6 is just a fancy chemical term for glucose. So I'll put glucose here. Not spelled very well because the C is terrible. Sorry about that. Then it takes 6 oxygens and it creates 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters plus energy in the form of ATP. That's the basics. So there's two steps. There's two processes that are a part of this. There are the anaerobic respiration. This is the part of cell respiration that does not require oxygen. So when you are, certain parts of it do not require that you use oxygen. If you look back here, guys, you can see oxygen is a pretty big deal in the process because it requires 6 molecules of oxygen in order for it to actually work. So there's only one step that is anaerobic that we'll be talking about in this class, and that's glycolysis. And I'll go into more detail about what glycolysis is later. After that, guys, we have what are called the aerobic respiration. These are the parts of cell respiration that actually do require oxygen, and these would include the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, wait a minute here, I've heard this word before, electron transport chain. Well, sort of. You heard electron transport, which happens only in photosynthesis. Electron transport chain is something that happens in this process here of cell respiration. I'll be going into more detail about what these are and how they work here in a little bit. But be careful, guys. This is a major point of confusion because they have very similar names, but they have very different results. So here's a broad overview of cell respiration without any of the big details. What happens is this. Inside of your mitochondria, so the idea here is that all this happens inside of your mitochondria. Inside your mitochondria, ADP is basically turned into ATP. That's the basic goal here. You want to take ADP and turn it into your energy molecule in the form of ATP right here. That happens in 3 places. The first step is called glycolysis. Glycolysis creates ATP and a molecule called NADH. Now be careful, this is not NADPH. NADPH only happens in photosynthesis. If you want a quick little reminder to help you remember that, remember NADPH, so think of it as the photosynthesis because there is a P in the letter in the photosynthesis version of this molecule. But it is not used in cell respiration. So glycolysis creates ATP and NADH. Then it goes to the Krebs cycle where, again, NADH and NADH are made, plus some ATP. Finally, FADH2 is made in the Krebs cycle. At the end, these molecules right here all end up going to the electron transport chain. So you can almost think of the goal of cell respiration is to make ATP, but it does that using a molecule called NADH and FADH2. So let's go with the first step. The first step is called glycolysis, which I have pictured right here. So that would be the step I talked about right there. Glycolysis is basically taking sugar and breaking it down into a molecule called pyruvate. So here's your glucose right here at the very beginning. As you see, you have 6 carbons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that is being broken down into a molecule here at the bottom called pyruvate. And you will get 2 of these when you are done. Now, some ATP, as you see here, is used to break the glucose in half. So ATP, the molecule you want to get, is used to break the glucose down into G3P. At which point in time, it goes through a series of chemical processes, which we are not going to require you memorize, and you are going to get 2 ATP and 1 NADH as a result. So if you come to the math here, you realize that glycolysis gives you 1 ATP and 1 NADH. As you can see, the process right here. Your starting point is glucose, your ending point is pyruvate. Everything else right here, I've already talked about. It's just me explaining it in words of what's going on over here. Once you have pyruvate, guys, what happens next is the pyruvate goes into what is called the Krebs cycle, which is on the next slide. The Krebs cycle, guys, takes pyruvate and basically turns it into energy that it can be used. This process is called oxidation. You might have heard this term from chemistry. It's going to appear a lot here in biology, so you might want to go back and revise over that from chemistry because there's a key term here you will use a lot in biology. So the pyruvate, what happens is that one of the carbon molecules is broken off and becomes carbon dioxide. This is where one of these CO2 molecules comes from in the process. It then gets turned into a molecule called acetylcoenzyme A, which then enters into the Krebs cycle right here and creates the process. So back here, NADH was made when the CO2 was broken off. Acetylcoenzyme A joins in with a 4-carbon compound right here, which again, you don't have to know what this is called, but you should know it's a 4-carbon compound, which then creates a 6-carbon compound, which then the carbon dioxide gets broken off, and that creates another NADH. It gets broken off again, which creates another NADH, which leaves you with only 4 carbons at this point right here, because there was 5 right here. 1 gets broken off right here, leaving you with a total of 4 carbons right here. Some other things we haven't talked about happen from here to here. In that process, a molecule called FADH2, ATP, and NADH are made. And that's the end game here. So let's do a quick count of what gets made. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 NADH molecules. We have 1 ATP is made. And you get one molecule called FADH2. That's the end result of the Krebs cycle. This here, guys, is going to take you some time to understand. You are going to want to probably revise over this slide a few times because this here is a process and you are going to have to kind of understand what is happening. A couple of things to help you do that is to remember whenever carbon dioxide is pulled off, you are losing a carbon because that carbon ends up right here. So you can kind of know that whenever CO2 pops out, you know you're going to lose a carbon. On top of that, you're going to know that the NADH and the FADH2 are not ATP yet. This here is done. You're finished. This ATP is good. It's done. This gives you energy you can use to move or do whatever you want to do. FADH and NADH, unfortunately, are not quite there yet. So because these 2 molecules here are not quite ATP yet, there has to be one more step in this process. And that's what's going to happen next. The next step is that the FADH2 and the NADH are going to go to what's called the electron transport chain, which is the next step here. The electron transport chain, guys, basically takes the molecules you got right here and it turns them into the ATP you are going to want to use for energy. And it does that through a couple of things. Now, first off, we should find out, okay, where are we right now? Well, right now we are currently inside of the mitochondria. Now, the mitochondrial matrix, that is the weird, if you look in here, you see how there's this weird little circly thing going back and forth inside of the mitochondria? We are on one side of that. Now, the outside of that is different. And if you look carefully, the same thing is kind of occurring, which happened in photosynthesis. The NADHs and the FADHs too, they are combining with these enzymes right here. Now remember, these proteins right here are enzymes. And what they're doing is these molecules here are giving an electron to the enzymes here, and the electrons are basically moving hydrogen molecules from the space here to outside out here. What that does is that makes this side here have more hydrogens than this side over here. So you save more hydrogen, this here would be less hydrogens. And that's the end result. At the very end, when these electrons go through the process, this is where the oxygen is going to come into account. The oxygen is going to combine with the hydrogens and make water. So the H2O pops in right here. So what ends up happening is that the hydrogens out here, they go in through a molecule, they go in through an enzyme called ATP synthase. The hydrogens basically act as a fuel source. They act as the petrol that runs ATP synthase. ATP synthase takes ADP, combines it with a phosphate molecule, and makes ATP. The end result of this is that you get two NADH molecules plus one FADH2. These two things end up becoming 32 ATP. That's a lot. It's a lot of ATP. So this process right here, the electron transport chain, makes most of the ATP that your body uses to survive. So it's definitely the most important part of the process. And as you can see, this process requires oxygen. So this would be part of one of the aerobic steps, AEROBIC. This is one of the aerobic steps in the process because it uses the oxygen, which you can see right here. Everything down here, guys, is just an explanation in words of what I've just told you up here in the diagram and explained it. So if you want to use, so I don't really need to go over this again because all of this here is the same thing that comes up here. So hopefully, guys, that makes some sense. Okay, so you now have an idea of how cell respiration works. We need now to bring all of this together and see how the two things interact with each other. This here, guys, is the photosynthesis part. So I'll put here for photosynthesis, and this here is cell respiration. As you can see here, guys, what happens is this. Photosynthesis creates oxygen and sugar. And where's the sugar at? The sugar should be somewhere. Aha, here it is, glucose. So photosynthesis creates oxygen and glucose, which is then used by the mitochondria to create water and CO2. The water and the CO2 is used by the photosynthesis system to create glucose. This whole thing, guys, is one big cycle. The products of photosynthesis are used as the reactants of cell respiration, and the products of cell respiration are used as the reactants of photosynthesis. These two processes work together on Earth to make sure that essentially we will probably never run out of any of these resources, because at the end of the day we are in one big recycling complex. And that's the basic idea here, guys. This is the interaction between photosynthesis and cell respiration. Now, you are going to want to take a pretty good look at these two charts and follow along with what's happening at each step, because you are going to definitely need to recreate this in some way in the final exam. This here is hard to understand, guys and gals. So please, you are going to want to revise over this a couple of times and make sure that you understand the process. Don't just try to memorize the key terms, because that's not going to work for you here. You have to understand what is going on and how the processes here are linked to the processes in cell respiration. And that's basically it, guys. Here are all the key terms you're going to want to look at from the chapter. Thank you very much for paying attention to the video, and I hope you guys have an excellent day, and I hope that this video made some sense to you.